Welcome to my channel. My name is Josie and I'm a graphic designer and I love Blender. I use Blender all the time and I'm like, where are the tutorials for the graphic designers? So I wanted to make this video today for you to make something easily and just make something in Blender because I know the learning curve is kind of hard and sometimes it's a bit overwhelming and a lot of stuff is not targeted towards us as designers specifically. Today we're going to be making this animation. This is just a spinning card. I haven't actually made it yet, but you will see. So we're making a spinning card, and the reason why I thought this was good is we're going to go over all the basics of making an object. And you know, if you're promoting tickets for an event, this could be really cool. If you're making a card or a pass like I did, this is really interesting, or like an ID, you know, for whatever, or even like a spinning poster, maybe you could do something with this. And I'm just going to keep it extremely simple, do everything as simple as possible, and we're going to do this in real time so you can make something and feel like you've come out of this tutorial with something to show for it and something that's actually very practical and usable as a designer. And if you're wondering, I learned Blender by following a million tutorials, just like a lot of other people. That's how I got into it. I did the donut, I did just a bunch of random stuff, and I think the best thing to do is start with those basic tutorials, something like this, that you can get something made and feel that motivation, and then have goals after that. So for me, I would have kind of concepts for very simple things I wanted to make. Like, for example, I made one of these star face containers and I did like a little like fake promo for them. That was really fun. So just having pretty simple models that you want to make and graphics that you want to do, and just looking up tutorials along the way as you're trying to make that is something that helped me when I was learning. So that's just a little tip before we get into it. But yeah, it took me a long time to learn, so I understand the struggle, and I'm definitely not an expert at all. So if I say anything wrong in this video, trust me, I'm still learning just as much as anyone else. So yeah, let's just get into it. So we are going to go into Blender now, and we're going to start with the basics of what the hell is Blender, and then we're going to make this card, and again, trying to keep it super simple for you guys. Alright, if you want to download Blender, just Google Blender, and on their website you can get it for free. It's open source, and just download it like any other application. And this is the home screen that you get when you open the app. So you have your option to open your recent files or make something new. We're just going to click on General here. And this is the scene. So there's a lot going on, but I'm just going to touch on what you're going to need to know for this tutorial. And I'm actually using a MacBook, so I have a laptop and I'm zooming in and out and moving around on the trackpad right now, just to let you know. So there's a cube, which is our default cube. There's the camera, that's what it looks like, and there's a light here. And you can see these objects along the side. You can click on them to highlight them, and you can also rename. So if I wanted to call this default cube, I could, which is just good for organizing things. And then you also have your visibility, so I can hide this or unhide it. You can also click H, which is the shortcut. And then here it disables it in the render. So if you click on this, then you're going to be able to see it in the scene right now, but when you render that final actual image, it's not going to be visible. So it's just good to keep track of these. Down here is all of our tabs. So first of all, we've got the render engine. So this talks a little bit about the render settings that you want to use, which we'll touch on later. And then you have the output, so the size of the images, where these images are going to be stored on your computer, things like that. This is the world here, so this is the environment that your objects are living in the scene, which we will again talk about later. These are modifiers, which we're not really going to get into, but these do all sorts of things to your objects, and it's very common to use multiple modifiers. There's also the physics properties, which do things to objects that are interacting with one another, like objects that hit each other, things like that. And then this is our materials, which we are going to be touching on briefly, and we're going to be using very simple materials for this. Down on the bottom here is our timeline, so this tells us about our animation. If you want to do a still image, you won't need to worry about that, but if you want your card to be animated, we'll be doing that later. And then along the side here is a couple of simple transformations you can make to your object. For example, just moving it around on the axes here. I'm just going to click Command Z to undo those things, rotating it. And the scale, you can also click S to scale up and down, and you can scale along the axes here. And if you go on this side here, you can change how you view it, from the top, from the side. The shortcuts are shown here, but I honestly never use the shortcuts for this. I just find it a little bit tedious. And then we have a couple options along here. So this is, the hand just drags around your viewport, just so you can see different angles. And then this camera button shows you what the camera sees, and the camera is going to be the final image or the final render. We'll talk about that later, so you don't need to worry about that right now. And I just dragged my mouse away to get off of that camera view. One really important shortcut is the N key. So if you click N, then you've got all of these different pieces of information about the object, and you can adjust these to be exactly how you want. So if I wanted the location to be 5 meters along the x-axis, there you go. And if I want this to be a 2 meter by 2 meter, I can change the dimensions exactly. Same with rotation. So this is really useful. And in Blender, it uses meter scales. So this is, of course, 2 meters by 2 meters, as you can see here. And Blender likes things to be a little bit bigger. So if you're doing a card like I am, I'm not going to be doing mine in centimeters. I'm going to be doing mine in meters. It just likes to compute things that are larger. I don't really know why. That's just the way that it is. And then on the top here, we can see our kind of shading previews. So this is our wire frame. That's just kind of our normal scene. This is our material preview, and then this is our render preview. So this is how objects actually get rendered. And sometimes, especially if you're using cycles or if you have things that are a bit complicated in the scene in terms of textures, then this won't be fully easy to see. It'll kind of try and render and pixel out, but you'll see that later. Along the top here, we also have all of these tabs. So if you just click the tab button, you can see all of these different changes we can make to an object, but this is also shown in modeling, and normally I just click on the modeling tab, and then you can do different things to the object, such as, inset faces, extruding, beveling, and you can do that based on the vertices, which are the dots here, the edges or the planes, and you can select up on the corner here. So if I want to only select the edges, I can do so. If I just want to move those around, I'll do that. If I want to select and change the vertices, I can do that as well, or the planes. And I'm just using the move tool just to move these things around. But again, you can use all of these different modifiers here. Sculpting is when you do things that are kind of like clay and you mold objects as you want to. We're not going to be using that, but it is really helpful. UV editing is when you unwrap an object and you project an image or a texture onto it. It's very useful, but it's something that honestly annoys me personally. We're not going to be using UV editing today. We're going to keep it all very simple. Same with texture painting. That's how you paint a texture onto an object. And then the shading viewport here is where you get really interesting, more complex textures. Let's go back to the layout, and I'm going to delete this cube. So that's just right click, delete. Now we're getting on to making the actual card. And guys, I'm just going to come out and say it. I'm just going to break the fourth wall, and I'm just going to say I've tried filming this like 4 times. And I'm in the trenches right now, and if I don't get it done on this one, my weekend's not ending on a high note. The design that I'm doing today is a metro card for the province of Saskatchewan. That's where I'm from. It's a huge province, it's very cold, and it's like physically impossible to have an underground metro, so I thought it'd be funny to make a metro card for my fictional Saskatchewan metro service called the Sask Pass. So that's what I'm doing for my design. And the first thing I'm going to do is make a little plane that is going to be the card. So to import an object into your scene, you click Shift A, and you have all these options. You can add more lights or cameras if you wanted to, but we're going to go to Mesh, Plane. It's just a completely flat plane right here. And I'm going to edit this to be more like a card. So I'm going to go to the top view and zoom in. And I'm going to go over here to the Scale tool and just scale this out a little bit. And I want to bevel the edges so that they're a little bit smooth. So I'm going to go into the modeling tab. Now that I'm in the modeling tab, all of the vertices are already selected, but I'm just going to show you that again. So I can select them all, or I can select just 2 of them or 1, whatever. But I'm going to select all of these and I'm going to bevel them. Beveling just means giving something a curve. Unfortunately, the bevel tool that's over here is weird about beveling vertices of planes. So I'm just going to go Shift Command B, and that's the shortcut. And just drag your mouse out and you can see that it's doing this beveling here. That should be good there. And I want them to be more even looking because you can see they're kind of uneven. So I'm just going to select these on the outside here and these on the outside here and scale these inwards. So that bevel is going to be a bit more smooth, and I'm actually going to make the whole thing maybe a little bit wider. And it should be fine. Okay, that looks fine. So again, I'm going to click Shift Command B to again bevel the corners, so you can see there's 2 more curves coming out of them. Maybe I'll do that one more time to make it extra smooth. Just be careful with this, because as you can see here, when I cross over, it gets all weird. So I'm just going to go like this. And that should be fine. Now in the layout, I just like to look at things in the layout, but this looks pretty good. I want to make it extra smooth, so I'm going to right click, shade smooth, and then you can see it really smooths off the corners, and that's something you can do to any object. It just makes it a lot nicer looking. So back into the modeling tab, I want to make this a little bit thicker, so I'm going to use the extrude region, and I'm going to select the plane. Just go to the side here so I get a good side view, and I'm just going to extrude this a tiny bit so it's a little sort of plastic card shape now. One thing to note about if you wanted to manipulate any vertices any further is if I went to view my vertices and I took, say, these two and I wanted to move them, that is not going to select the ones that are on the bottom here, so it gets kind of weird. So what I would have to do is go into X-ray mode, and that way I can select it all the way through. And then now I have moved all of those vertices that are going downwards. All right, so back in the layout, I'm looking at my object, and my design is actually 2 images. So I have a transparent PNG of the front and the back of my card. That's the design that I decided to make, and my designs are all black, but you can do things in color. It'll still show up in color. But I want to import these images, and I want to import them as a plane. However, I need to activate that because that setting is not automatically available in Blender. I'm going to go to Edit, Preferences, and Add-ons. And then in Add-ons, you can see there's a bunch of them here. But I'm just going to search up image and click on Import Export, import images as planes, and just check that off. And now that should be automatically enabled now. And when you download add-ons from the internet, you do the same thing. You have to install or activate them. So now if I click Shift A and I go to Image, then I can import an image as a plane. This here is the front design of my card, but you can't see it. So I'm going to go to the material preview, and now you can see the design. I'm going to just change the rotation of my card so that it matches. So I'm going to click N. I'm going to go to the rotation, and this here is 90 degrees on the X and 90 degrees on the Z. So I'll do the same thing. 90, 90, cool. And as you can see, it's flipped on the back, but this is just going to go on the front. So I'm just going to move this over until I can see it, and now that is available to view. I'm going to scale this up and just kind of match this to the card, and I'm also going to match the card a little bit more by scaling it down. So that looks fine, and now I'm going to import the back of it. So I'm going to do the same thing, Shift A, and then import image as planes. Here is the back of it. As you can see, it's flipped, so I'm just going to see what I need to do to rotate that. There we go. And I'm going to go minus 90 degrees, so it's exact, and scale this the same way as I did the other one, just making sure that it's actually up next to the card. All right, so that's fine there. And now I've got my card here, and I'm going to apply a material to all of these. So first I'm going to click on the plane, which is my card, and I'm going to add a new material. So now this is just a white material, and here on the materials tab you can edit this. I'm going to change the base color to be a really bright orange. This is the color of prairie lilies, which is the Saskatchewan provincial flower. Niche Saskatchewan reference there for you. And then I'm going to turn the roughness down so it's a little bit shinier, maybe 0.2. And I'm going to go into the cards here. So on the front, I also want this to have a lower roughness so it's not super matte. And I want to maybe add a little bit of metallic to this. So I'm going to go 0.2, or actually 0.5 on the metallic. And then same with the back, I'm going to do the same thing. You can play around with these material settings as much as you want and just see what happens with them. But there you have it. Here is our card design. However, I need the design to actually stick to the card because right now I can just move this around and it just doesn't have any way of attaching. And to do this really quickly, I'm going to join them all together. However, when you join all of these planes together, it cannot be undone. So you're going to want to keep a copy of that just in case. So I'm going to select everything. I'm going to go Command C to copy and Command V to paste. I'm just going to move these to the side. So in case I need it, that's over there, but I'm gonna hide all of these objects and hide them in the render view as well. So I'll forget about them until I actually need them. And now what I'm gonna do is I am going to just put these planes as close up to the card as possible. And I know it's all a bit tedious, but this is just easier than doing UV unwrapping. And I'm gonna select all of these, right click and hit join. And now this is one object. So I can move this around as much as I want. I can spin it around. All right, so now that we have our object, we need to put this in a world. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to the world tab here, and we are going to import something called an HDRI. And what that is basically it's a panoramic photo that's all stitched together, and it creates a whole environment that your objects live in. And this is a really great way to give you realistic lighting. So just go to a website called polyhaven.com, and they've got tons of HDRIs with different environments and scenes. Or you can just Google HDRI and find any that you can, but I like using Polyhaven, it's just easy. And I'm gonna import mine right now. So we're gonna click on color, environment texture, and then you're gonna open that file that you just downloaded. So now we just imported an environment, but you can't see that. We're just gonna need to go to the render view. So now our object is outside in this pasture place, and this is the scene that I want to be rendering my animation on. I'm just gonna go back into the material preview, and we're gonna talk about cameras right now. So the interesting thing about Blender is that you can adjust the camera settings like an actual camera. So I've just clicked on the camera right now, and I'm gonna go down here to where it says data, and I can change the focal length, I can change the depth of field, and this is great if you know a ton about photography. You can get really into the details of it, so that's really exciting. But I am gonna just play around with what focal length I want, and I'm actually gonna rotate my camera so that it makes a bit more sense here. And it's actually facing my object. There we go. And I'm gonna move this down in the scene, and when I click this camera button, I can see what the camera sees. And when I go to the View tab, and I click Camera to View, then I can actually zoom in and out and move the camera around, and I'm actually able to adjust it like this as well. And if I don't click that, then that just goes out of it, so that that setting is set for you. I don't want my final image to be 1080 by 1920. What if I want it to be a square or something? So for that, we're gonna go into the output, and you can see the default resolution here is 1080 by 1920. So you can make your resolution whatever you want. Obviously you can make it very small images for fast renders, but that is gonna be more pixelated, or you can make it really big images. What if I wanna make it a square? I'm gonna do 1080 by 1080 and just try that. And then down here in the output, this is where you are saving those images to. So if I wanted to save it to my desktop, I would just click and find my desktop, or I would click and save it to a folder if I have an animation. And you can also change the file type that you are saving it as. I want these images to be a pretty small size, so I changed that to a JPEG. And the quality, just adjusts the compression that you have. Let's talk a bit about the render engine. So the default render engine is Eevee, and that is really easy on your computer. It doesn't take long to render things, but Cycles does a lot more realistic renders. So it takes in light bounces a lot better, and it just makes things more realistic, especially if you have more complex materials like metal or glass. I typically would recommend Cycles. And I'm gonna use Cycles today because I like it, but it takes longer to render things. Down here we see our viewport samples. So that's what we're looking at right now, and it takes 1024 samples. The render noise sampling over here shows what the render is gonna actually be seeing, and that's taking 4000 samples, which is way too much. We can start at 50. And that's gonna be honestly pretty good. Make sure you have denoise clipped, that's pretty important, because that makes things faster, and it also takes out the noise and makes everything smooth. One thing that's just good to remember is if you want this to be a transparent background and to save it as a transparent PNG, go to Film, click Transparent. And when you're doing this, just make sure that in this output settings, you're choosing PNG for that. But I want to have this sky background, so I am not gonna have that turned on. So I'm gonna turn off that transparent setting. This is all looking pretty good. I think the lighting is okay, but I want to see maybe if I want to change that up. So I'm going to click on the light here, which is just the default in the scene. And you can do all sorts of things to the lighting. So you can change the strength of the lighting, you can change the color. If you just click on the lighting and you go down here to this lighting data tab. So for example, if I wanted the light to be pink, you can see it there. If I wanted it to be green, you can see the effect that that has. And there's different lights, like the sun obviously is very bright, and then there's these spotlights and area lights, which are very useful. Again, if you know a lot about photography and a lot about lighting, like, you're gonna be great at this. So you can just create scenes with the exact lighting that you want. I think for now though, I'm just gonna hide this light, and I'm gonna play around with the way that I want my card to look in the actual render. So I'm just gonna adjust that right now, and I'm gonna hide this light from my view and my render view and just see if I want that later on. Okay, so I'm happy with these settings. I just changed the shade smooth to shade auto smooth because it was doing this kind of smoothing the edges thing, so I don't want that to happen. I want it to be more like it's a cut card. So I just put shade auto smooth, and I like the way that this spins here. I'm just playing around with this rotation option, and we'll talk about animating it, rotating a little bit later. But I want to move the light over and see what it looks with some lighting over here, so I'm just gonna move this over. Okay, I think this is fine. This is sitting inside of my camera view here. It's always important to make sure it's not clipping outside. And this is just gonna be okay. I am going to go ahead and try rendering this still just right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna click render, render image. And now it's taking the samples that it needs to take. So as you can see, it's gonna sample up to 50, which takes a little bit with cycles, but that's okay. And it's denoised, and now we've got this image here. It's showing a bit of the reflection happening. So I think I'm happy with this. This is fine. What I'm going to do is save this image just as a still. So you can go to image, save as, and just choose what you want to name it and where you want to save it in your computer. And that's how you get a still image. Now that we have made an object, we've textured it, we know what it's like when it's rendering, we're going to make an animation. The way to do an animation is we're going to render every single frame of the animation and then compile that at the end in After Effects. If you don't have After Effects, you can also do this in Blender. Just look up tutorials on that because I'm going to be doing After Effects. But yeah, so we need to first make the keyframes for this animation. So the first place that this card is going to be sitting at is, put that at 0 degrees, and this is the very first frame. I am going to be rotating it along the x-axis, just like you saw me do earlier when I was testing it out. I was just rotating it here. So it's constantly spinning, but I'm going to start at 0 degrees. And on the timeline down here, you can see how many frames there are in an animation. So right now there's 250 frames, but I can cut that down and say I want 150, and that's what it looks like. I can say I want 500, 600, whatever. First of all, let's do 150 frames. I'm going to click on my object, right click, and go to Insert Keyframe, Rotation. As you can see, there's all sorts of things you can do, but we're just going to go on rotation. This has gone yellow. You can see that the rotation has been keyframed. And I can move my timeline cursor anywhere along here. I'll just go to 150 because that's where I want it to be. And I'm going to change the rotation to what I want it to end at, which is going to be 360 degrees. So it does a full rotation. It hasn't changed because that's what happens when you rotate 360 degrees. And insert keyframe, rotation again. And now you can play this. So if I start at the beginning here and press play, we can see how it looks when it's rotating and the speed. This is a bit fast for me, so maybe I do want to go to 200 frames. Move this. Go. And I think this speed looks pretty good. You can kind of get an idea of what's happening, but it's speeding up and slowing down, which I don't like. I want this to be a constant loop. And this is something that I've done all the time, and it's really useful in graphics like posters, moving posters, websites, things like that. So I want it to be a really smooth loop. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna pause, select both of these keyframes down here, and then right click and go to interpolation mode and click linear right here. And now it's going to be moving at a constant rate. So this is perfect for making a looping animation to put on your website or whatever you want to do with it. So now I need to render this animation and I need to put all of the frames somewhere. So we're going to go to the output. Just going to double check here that this frame range is what I want it to be. So 1 to 200, that is correct. And then we're going to go to output. And I have made a folder on my desktop that is the file that I want all of these images to go to. So I'm going to open that up. So now all of the images I'm about to render are going to go into the spinning card animation folder that's on my desktop. And those are going to be ready for me when I need them. And I want these files to be JPEG, so they're not too big. But of course, if you have a transparent background, you can use a PNG, you can do whatever you want. So if you're wondering why I'm not just rendering this out as a video file, it's because if Blender crashes or something happens, you lose all your progress. And some of these renders take legitimately days to make. Like it can take a very, very long time. So you want to make sure that you always have something you can go back to. And I recently did a project that was a lot of animations, and it was really helpful for me to have all of the keyframes. So it's just a good habit to have to render out all of the keyframes. Now I actually want to render my image pretty quickly. So I'm going to see if I can lower the samples on here. Maybe I'll take it down to 20 and see if that works. So I'm just going to render and render image and see if it looks okay at 20 samples. And I think that's going to be just fine, so I'm going to keep it at 20 samples. If you are rendering something that has much more complex reflections or textures, like metal or glass, then you are going to want to have a lot of samples for that, or else your animation has a sparkly kind of look to it, and like not in a good way. So that's just one thing to remember. But yeah, now I'm going to hit render animation. And now this is going to render out every single frame of this animation and put that into the folder that I made. So I'm going to come back to you once these are all rendered out, and we're going to compile this animation into an actual video. I've opened up After Effects, and this is where we're going to compile the animation. So I'm just going to go to File, Import, and then File. Now that I have selected the folder that the animation is in, I'm just going to click on the first image here and make sure that you have Create Composition selected and open. And now this is the video. And I can export this as an MP4. So I am just going to go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue, and I can change the settings as I want to. So this is fine the way that it is, and I'm going to output and select the name and where it's going to be going to, and I'll just keep that on the desktop, so this is just going to be saved, and when I click render, it'll render the animation. Now my video has been compiled, here it is, this is the final render, and I'm gonna go and make all sorts of dimensions of this video. So I hope this was helpful, guys. I spent all day doing this. It's literally dark outside. So hopefully you get some use out of this, but I'm gonna go now, and thanks for watching.